Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrive by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi. For episode 123, we sit down with Brent Robertson, a designer, storyteller, and founder of the North Fork Authentic. Brent's journey begins in Sag Harbor, winds through the creative crucibles of Brooklyn and the Pratt Institute, into the hallowed halls of NBC and Saturday Night Live, then across the Atlantic to London's renowned design firm Pentagram. Returning to New York City in the 1980s, Brent carved a career in advertising and design through the boom and bustle of the 90s. Eventually, the tide brought him to Greenport, where his work and life converged in the founding of North Fork Authentic, a venture aimed at reconnecting people with place, drawing both locals and visitors into a deeper understanding of what this region has to offer. In today's conversation, we trace that arc and explore his hopes for the future of the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 123 with Brent Robertson. This episode was recorded February 11th, 2025.
Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So in the beginning, I'd like to just start off, if you can give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised.
Sure. Like many other Long Islanders, I think we're all nomadic. We tend to either grow up or were born in the West and kind of gradually move east, and I'm no different. Was born in Bayshore, lived in West Islip probably until I was about 7. We moved from West Islip to Great River, which is by Oakdale on the Connecticut River on the South Shore, which is a beautiful area. Both of my parents were kind of big executives. My mother was at EVP at Abraham and Strauss in the retail world. My father was in the insurance business. He was a executive vice president at Metropolitan Life. And I think at some point my father really got bored with his job and wanted to go back to his passion. So they sold everything and we all moved to Southampton and bought a small motel right across the street from Southampton College, next to the Marine Biology Center on Old Fort Pond Bay, which was a great place to grow up as a kid. And that kind of really opened my eyes to a whole different world. Agriculture, aquaculture, just kind of the beauty of the East End. We actually lived right behind Shinnecock Golf Course, which was also a fun place to be. That kind of western end of Southampton was almost the forgotten part of Southampton. You know, when you say Southampton, people think of all big estates and everything, and this wasn't that. But, you know, it was a fun place to go. My father had the opportunity, well, he sold the motel, opened a restaurant in Conscience Point in Southampton, had that for a while, then opened a place or took over a place in Sag Harbor on Main Street called the Sandbar. And so we moved to Sag Harbor, and that was a whole different thing. Sag Harbor at the time was the Unhampton. It wasn't the Hampton like it is today. It was really a mix of small industry, agriculture in town. You had John Silly's cow farm right behind town. You had Rowe Industries who were making vending machines on Bay Street. Atlantis foul weather gear was on Long Wharf. It was kind of a balance of tourism and other industries. And a lot of artists, a lot of poets, writers, actors. It was really a great environment to grow up as a kid. 5 o'clock on a Friday, you'd have like the who's who of the art world at the bar. Mm-hmm. Not that I knew who they were, but, Willem de Kooning would come in and get too drunk. It was kind of a funny environment. It's like, who are these crazy people, right? And I was a kid, but I guess I'm a culture sponge, and I just kind of watched and absorbed, right?
Around what year was that?
That would be like set 1970.
Okay.
Okay. And in those days, particularly on the South Fork, famous artists were everywhere, but you didn't know who they were, right? They were there because they loved the light, they loved the landscape, they liked the culture. And honestly, they wanted to be left alone to paint, to make art. So it wasn't about look at me, right? It was about leave me alone, I want to create. Yes. Social media didn't exist then, right? Mm-hmm. But, it was a great place to grow up. There was tremendous kind of arts and culture. I think it went from New York City, and it kind of just leapt over the middle of the island, mid-island, all the way to the East End, And so I was exposed to a lot of, really interesting people doing great things, and that was kind of a special time and a special place. And at the same time, we would walk down Main Street. On the other side of the firehouse was the American Hotel, which was bricked up for about 50 years, okay? Abandoned, They bricked over the windows, locked the door, and left it. And my father said, "What do you think about opening that?" And I was, "Sure, Dad, whatever." Right? So I guess I'm all about connecting the dots. And at the same time, my mother had a retail store in Southampton on Job's Lane. And a woman that worked for my mother happened to be the, I think, third wife of Ted Conklin. So Ted was the money. My father was the idea guy. And the two of them bought the hotel. And my father opened the hotel. So that was yet a whole other adventure, right? And that was fascinating to go into the hotel. It really was like walking into a museum. There was a ledger, there was a log, ship's captain logs, all sorts of treasures, right? Tremendous amount of history. So that was a fun place. Did that for a while. I worked in the kitchen in every role possible, from dishwasher to busboy to line cook to, you name it, I did it. In the summer, on the weekends, when everybody else was off playing, well, I was working. That's the life of the restaurant business. And then fast forward to I graduated from Pearson High School. My father died a few months later. I went off to Brooklyn to Pratt. My brother went to join the Peace Corps and went to Chad, and my mother went to West Hampton. So going to Brooklyn in 1976 was quite the experience.
Did you know what you wanted to do coming out of high school?
Yes. Well, I was fortunate in that when I was in high school, I was really focused on art, art and design. Okay. And at that time, graphic design as a kind of career didn't really exist, right? Sometimes it was called commercial art, right? You were either an artist or you were other, or you were advertising, right? But, there was nothing in between. I was lucky as a high school kid that, I worked with some local painters doing things, so I was exposed to that. I just had kind of an affinity for art, whatever that was, so I went to Pratt. Pratt was a great place. It was a perfect place for me because it was the mind meld of cultures. It was diversity. We had students from around the world at that small school, right? So you're exposed to everything, different ways of thinking. The whole school was based on the Bauhaus School, which basically when you start, your first year is called Foundation. Okay, so you do light, color, and design. You do sculpture. You learn art history, you learn architecture, you learn how to write. I mean, you kind of learn everything, right? The premise being that, well, you may think you want to be an architect, but maybe after 4 years or later, you change your mind and go into another field. They're all kind of interrelated, and they really wanted to give you a strong foundational education. One of my teachers was a sculptor named David Lee Brown, who taught 3D design, basically sculpture. Right? We called it form in space. Some people called it formless waste, right? But anyway, we're snarky college kids. Day one, we're all sitting in a studio, and he comes in with a pile of the New York Times, and he puts one in front of everyone. And he says, go to the business section and read. And we're all scratching our heads. Like, what does this have to do with sculpture, right? And so that was lesson one. Lesson one was, if you're going to be an artist, if you're going to be a sculptor, okay, you need resources, okay? Somebody has to buy your art. Somebody has to pay for you to produce these things, right? Otherwise, you'll be a starving artist, right? So he said, when the market's up, corporations buy art. When the market's down, they don't, okay? There are benefactors, there are museums, there are all these other things, right? So all of a sudden you're exposed to, the realities of being in the arts. Now, in my class kids were all going into different areas, right? We had fashion design students, art history students, architecture students. It didn't matter, okay? We were basically put into groups of like 30 per class or thereabouts, right? And everybody went through the same program, which was the Bauhaus training. So you were exposed to architecture and everything else, right? And all of a sudden, this whole world opened up. You saw the interconnectivity of all of these things. And really how it doesn't matter. You may be one thing that doesn't kind of presuppose you to not think in a different way. Think big and broad. Creativity is creativity. And really, it was kind of an eye-opener for me. I was 18. What did I know? I ended up working for David Lee Brown in the summer, building sculptures, okay. Built a DN ice boat because, we were in Springs and it was cold then. And you could go to Mecox and ice boat. And I'm an avid sailor. So for me, that was like a simple transition. Though I learned that ice boating and sailing, really have nothing in common. But that's okay. And how, I'm also a big believer in serendipity, in that David Lee Brown's next door neighbor was a guy named Willem de Kooning. Okay, so I used to run into him. I ended up working for him. So all these things. Go back to art school. People say, what'd you do in the summer? So I worked for de Kooning. No, that couldn't be. So, yeah, you couldn't make this stuff up. And so, part of it is just being open to opportunities and experiences and being able to kind of, see things and take a little bit of a leap of faith. When I was in school, I needed to make some money. So I ended up getting a job at NBC. I worked on the nightly news and I worked on the graveyard shift, okay, from 12 to 8. And then I worked on the Today Show, right, which was great. Which was another eye-opener, right? Rockefeller Center, and, it was a pretty amazing place. And from there, I took the leap to work for the David Letterman on the Letterman Show, and then went and worked on the Saturday Night Live show. And an amazing creative environment, okay? I had never intended to go into broadcast design, so I guess your question might be, what would I do?
Well, I was going to ask, was this after you had graduated?
No.
This was while you were still doing your BFA?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I needed to make some money. And somebody said, gee, go to NBC. And sure, why not? And I did. What did I know, right? And luckily I got a job, right? And I brought a friend with me, right? And so he got a job there too. And, it was really interesting training. I mean, again, everything is education. And this is a case where, you're in a kind of a newsroom and we're the graphics department, if you will. So for the nightly news, you may have 20 to 30 people working there. right? Just creating things, whether it's making maps, doing graphics. When you watch the news and you see the image over the newscaster's shoulder, somebody made that art that's in there. That's what we did, right? We did specials, right? We did all sorts of things. Anything that somehow came under the purview of news. And at that time, the Letterman show and then Saturday Night Live was part of the news division. And Studio 8A, I believe, which is still there, was down the hall from us. So I would sneak out of my office when there wasn't much going on and go watch there. And I ended up getting a job with them, right? It was all in the same big family. But I kind of realized very quickly that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my career. I thought, okay, I'm almost going a little too fast. I need a little bit more structure because it's very freeform. So when I graduated from Pratt, I went and got a job at Dow Jones and Company. Okay. Couldn't be more different than Saturday Night Live. Total opposite, right?
Yeah.
This is the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, right? Super corporate, super conservative, right? And I said, but that's okay. Let me try that. Let's see. And I did that for a year to the day. My direct boss was the art director there, and he was a great guy, very creative. And the VP of marketing was very rigid, and I was very unrigid. And so after a year, I decided this isn't for me. And that's okay. When you're, look, I was 22. You need to kind of try a lot of things out and see what's going on. It was a great experience, right? So I had the opportunity to go to Europe. My girlfriend at the time said, let's go to Europe. And I said, okay. Didn't even really occur to me. Wasn't on my radar. When you grow up in Sag Harbor in the summer, why would you leave, right? So I went to Europe with the plan of going for a month, ended up staying a year and a half. Traveled throughout most of Western Europe, literally Portugal, Spain, up and down the country, France. I mean, we flew into Paris, took an overnight train from Paris to Barcelona, went all through Spain, over into Portugal, back through Spain, back into France, through the south of France, Côte d'Azur, went through Italy, up and down the coast of Italy, went from Brindisi, which is kind of the heel and the boot, over to Corfu, which is Greece. Ended up working on a charter sailboat for 4 months there, which was fun, right? I mean, who knew, right? Didn't speak the language, didn't speak many of these languages. Spoke a little French, a little Spanish, but not really much. It didn't matter. I think if you had kind of the right attitude and you were willing to either learn or smile or be flexible, people kind of embraced you. And so that was really fun. And I always had kind of a passion to go work for a firm in London called Pentagram. So when I was in Corfu, I mean, I traveled. I went to Crete. I went through most of the Greek islands. I went through, at that time, Albania, which was a communist country. I went up the coast of Yugoslavia, which is now Croatia. You have to realize this was like 1981, 82. There were still Eastern Bloc countries.
Yes.
Croatia was like, oh my God, how beautiful. And also in those kind of places, weather impacts everything, just like here. By October, the weather started to get cold and rainy, and I started to move north. And it became more and more expensive the further north I got. Took the overnight train through Switzerland, got into Munich, early in the morning, tried to sleep in a train station, and they kicked me out, right? Why? Because a hotel room at that time was $30 a night. That was a lot of money. So I kind of did, almost a big 360 throughout Europe and wended my way from Germany into Belgium, into the Netherlands, which was absolutely fabulous, and eventually over to the UK. And made it to London. And through a connection, I got an interview with Pentagram, which was my dream job at the time. And Pentagram at that time, I don't know if anyone knows about kind of integrated design firms or whatever, but Pentagram was 5 partners, and they each practiced different disciplines. So you had architecture, interior design, graphic design, product design, and industrial design. And their premise, the idea was if you put all these together, they all can collaborate to create things. Okay. So I became a convert. I was exposed to that. At that time, that was not a big idea. I mean, well, it was a big idea, but it wasn't, it wasn't what it is today. Nowadays you say integrated communications or whatever, and people kind of have a sense, right? But then it really was, they created entire experiences. They would work for a company, they would do the brand identity, they would write the communications, they would design the furniture that went into the building that they designed, and the whole thing, right? So, it was really kind of this total, what we would call now a brand experience, right? So that was a fascinating education. Great guys, highly creative. Loved London at that time. London also, and the UK had a problem. They had incredibly high unemployment. So after about 8 months, I had to leave. The way that it works, working in Europe, if you're not an EU citizen, is they have to be able to justify keeping you, that no one else in their country can do the job you're doing, okay? And that just wasn't the case.
So you made your way back.
I made my way back to New York, right? And, at that time they had just opened a New York office, so I went to work there. I worked there for a little while. And then, it was like, okay, time to get a job, And, my life, my career path has really been a lot of referrals from one kind of either design firm or client-side business to another. So I worked at a lot of great firms doing a lot of different things. Worked at a place called Walker Group, which was an architectural retail design firm. So we would design projects like South Street Seaport, right? Or Faneuil Hall in Boston, or Macy's, right? We would design department stores. We would design, big shopping malls, corporate centers, or we would do a retail prototype for the Gap, where they would basically design this and build, 100 of them across the country, right? So again, that was much like what my experience was in Pentagram. And, I really loved it because it involved everything. You weren't kind of pigeonholed into specific things. I think as creative as you were able to think, you could do, which was a wonderful environment.
What about New York City in the 80s? How was the environment outside?
New York City in the 80s was great. It was a blast. I mean, you have to realize Pentagram had just moved into a building across from Madison Square Park. So they were like in 26th and 26th and 5th. Okay. Madison Square Park at that time was kind of like Needle Park, The Flatiron District was no man's land, right?
It's kind of empty in some parts.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how New York has kind of evolved, right? The Dakota, where John Lennon lived, right? That was referred to as the Dakota because going that far north of Manhattan was like going to the Dakotas. It was so far up. Manhattan really was, Midtown. That was the it place, okay? And all of a sudden things got very congested, very expensive. People were kind of moving out to the edges, and finding new areas to move to. Walker Group was in the meatpacking district, so we had, 3 floors of a huge industrial building at Little West 13th Street, which is kind of, we literally overlooked what is now the New Whitney Museum, okay? At that time, nothing was there. So we had this like panoramic view of the west side of Manhattan, which was fabulous, right? And more importantly for the owner, Ken Walker, the real estate was cheap. Right? So it was a win-win. And I think typically most creative people kind of move into these neighborhoods and really build them, and everybody else follows, right? You know, a lot of my friends were photographers, so they all lived in kind of the fringe areas of Manhattan because they needed space and they didn't want to pay a lot for it, right? So I got a funny call one day. I was in the middle of a presentation, you know, at Walker Group, from someone who said, I work at a small ad agency and we would like to meet with you. We think you could help us out. And I was intrigued. And I was intrigued because I realized, you know, when we would work for clients like The Gap, we would go into a presentation and the ad agency would be there. And they would walk in with 2 sketches on a piece of tissue paper and hold it up. And the client would go, wow, that's great. And we'd have these big elaborate presentations and the clients would go, yeah, I don't know. And then I realized, oh, kind of the way the food chain works, okay, the agencies are on the strategic side of things, okay? And that's where the lion's share of their budget is spent. So agencies were selling ideas and we were selling design. Though I think we were much more conceptual in the design side of it than many, we still didn't have a seat at that table. So when I got the call to go to an ad agency, I was intrigued. And I said, And I went to go work for a small agency called Griffin Bacall, which had a little client at the time called Hasbro. Okay. They had 65 people. They had offices in 3 different buildings in Midtown. I jumped ship. I was basically the creative director of the promotion department, which I founded with somebody else, right? And we would do all of the things that were non-television commercial related. The way advertising worked in those days is if a client had, let's say, a $5 million budget, the agency got 15% of the media, right? So, and that's how they got their fees, you know. And advertising agencies created commercials. They either did print or TV or both, right? This agency didn't know from print. They knew TV. They did it really well, okay? Hasbro acquired Milton Bradley. They acquired Play School. They acquired Tonka, okay? In the 2 years that I was there, they went from 65 people to 300 people. For a brief period in time, my office was in the Play School showroom at 200 Fifth Avenue, which used to be the toy building, which is now Italy.
Yes.
Right? So, and from there south was still kind of no man's land. Lower Fifth Avenue was like, huh? But there were advertising agencies there. And we moved into one of those buildings at 18th and 5th, and we took 5 floors. It was a fun experience because we got to do everything from designing showrooms for Toy Fair to packaging to some product design to communications to collateral to print to you name it, right? Anything that you might create or do to promote a brand or a product that wasn't TV, we did it. And that was a lot. And we went and, you know, because I didn't want to be beholden to only one big client, which was Hasbro, we went and pitched other clients and got them. So we had Stride Right, which is a shoe company, right? Stride Right has Sperry and Topsider and, you know, other things, right? You know, it was thriving and thriving and thriving. And then I guess I kind of got the itch to go do my own thing, you know? And of course, some clients were going to leave and come with me. Well, that's kind of an old story. That didn't happen, right? So I jumped ship, opened a design firm, which evolved into a communications firm. And, you know, the way that business works, without clients, you have nothing, right? So, you know, you are what your clients want, right? So we kind of evolved. Tremendous opportunity, again, connecting the dots from past experiences. A guy that I worked with at NBC, his wife was the one of the founders of the James Beard Foundation. So I ended up working for them, basically helping launch the James Beard Awards and the James Beard Foundation, though it officially launched beforehand, right? But, so that kind of brought me into the world of food. And, at that time, there weren't celebrity chefs. You had Julia Child, Jacques Pepin. That was kind of it. Right?
Yeah.
You had Craig Claiborne and Pierre Franey, right, of the New York Times. You had a couple of superstar chefs, but primarily it was Julia Child, right? Mm-hmm. And so they had the first James Beard Awards at, I want to say the Midtown Marriott or the Marriott Marquis, right? Which is like Times Square. And, I got introduced, or I got kind of immersed, if you will, into the world of chefs and wine and spirits and other things. And I was fascinated and I was hooked. From there, we had Co-Brand as a client. Co-Brand was probably one of the largest importers and distributors of wine and spirits in the country. And each thing, it's like kind of you learn, I guess I've always been a little bit of a shark in the sense that you kind of are constantly moving and constantly evolving, and through osmosis, all of these different experiences add to your next thing.
Yes.
And, so from that, we ended up merging with an agency. All of a sudden, Bordeaux was a client, Bordeaux was fascinating, though difficult. They're French, I'm sorry to say. We were kind of thrown into travel and tourism. Switzerland was a client. Mm-hmm. Swiss Air, things like that. So that was a whole other world. And then you see, the kind of convergence of food and beverage and travel and tourism and hospitality, right? They're all really much similar things.
Intertwined.
Right? Intertwined, because really, what do people want? Experiences, right? And so you realize, you can kind of leverage and cross-promote those things. So from Bordeaux, I knocked on the door of Spain. I'd always been enamored with Spain. And at that time, you couldn't give Spanish wine away, And Wines from Spain was... we're talking 1992, 93. Mm-hmm. Wines from Spain and Foods from Spain were in the Chrysler Building. So just to go in there for a meeting was great too, right? Part of it is like, look, any excuse to go experience new things, right? You can't just go walk into the Chrysler Building. The lobby you can, but not the rest of it, right? Mm-hmm. So long story short, worked with them for over 20 years, basically doing everything. And, the reason Wines from Spain is germane is that it's a country that, it's really economic development to promote all of the goods and services that they offer the world, right? Mm-hmm. At that time, initially, Spain had 67 DOs, which are denomination of origins, okay, which have kind of like they're certified districts, Think about it that...
Like Italy has the
exactly
Parmesan Reggiano or the balsamic Motina.
Yes, exactly. Those are about origin, right?
Yeah.
That, Parmigiano Reggiano is only really legit if it is produced within a certain particular region, right? And it's about preserving the brand and the integrity of the product and the whole thing, right? I mean, so again, this is kind of integrated, economic development in kind of the broadest sense, right? It's a little bit preservation, but it's also about marketing. It's about product quality. When I say preservation, I mean, in a lot of these regions, these are multi-generation families, that you might have a producer that's producing Parmigiano Reggiano. They could be fifth, sixth generation, right? They want to kind of maintain that, and they want to keep the product quality high. So that was yet another education, and you realize, okay. And I went from wines from Spain to add foods from Spain to work with multiple producers to multiple regions. Spain had about, 67, 68 DOs. And they constantly change because they're constantly adding, some go away, some don't meet certifications, right? And the idea with wines from Spain, really the strategy that we devised was to kind of groom and launch each new DO every year, right? Almost to kind of, pre-erat. Put pre-erat and focus on that. And once they're out into the world and they're recognized, move to the next one and continue that, right? And so you basically have this portfolio of regions, right? And within those regions, you have brands. And, the brands are stellar world-class brands, right? So, and part of the strategy there also was not only are we selling wine, but we're selling experiences, okay? So when you're selling Spain, okay, wine is part of it, food is part of it, the environment is a large part of it, right? It's perceptions of what people think. And most people in this country may be familiar with Barcelona, maybe Madrid if they're lucky, and after that, not so much, right? And Spain is an incredibly diverse country. In the north by Rioja and Bilbao, you can ski. They get snow. It's mountainous, okay? And then you go into the south, and it's flat and arid and dry, right? And everything in between, okay? And so I spent years and years and years traveling through every nook and cranny in Spain, okay, learning, photographing, doing things for campaigns. And it was really an amazing experience, trying products, the whole thing. And with these kind of situations, they're also very political. Politics change, the players change. Basically I worked for... in essence, kind of like a trade ambassador, and they would rotate from post to post. So they may be in New York for a few years, and then they'll be moved to somewhere else. So, the world changes, you evolve with it, right? But this all kind of leads into, while I'm doing this, and while we're then relaunching Rioja, okay, which is really Spain's darling, right? Rioja is the only DOCA. Okay. And it's kind of like on par with Bordeaux. And when there was a phylloxera epidemic in Bordeaux, many of the French took the vine stock, and they walked across the border, because they're not far from Spain, right? They walked across and they went to Rioja and they planted the vines. Okay. So Rioja and Bordeaux are really kind of on par. They're really almost interconnected, literally and figuratively.
Were you helping just within the market in Spain, or bringing this over to the U.S.?
No, it's over to the U.S., yeah.
Marketing it over.
Yeah. What my responsibility in this was North America.
Okay.
Right? So it was primarily the U.S., a little bit of Canada, a little Mexico, but not much. You also have to realize that Spain was kind of just coming into its own, being recognized as a producer of world-class wines. At that time, Paris was still considered the culinary gastronomic capital of the world. There's a beautiful town, one of my favorites on the planet, called San Sebastian, which I don't know if you've been.
I haven't been, but I know of it.
Okay, it's on the Cantabrian Sea in the corner, okay, and it's really Basque country, okay? It's mountainous, it's green, it's lush. It's more considered like Ireland than Spain. It's about a half an hour from Bilbao, and Bilbao is about 15 minutes from Rioja. So by proximity, it's all kind of considered Rioja or Rioja adjacent, right? So the logic was, if you're going to really continue to grow and build and grow a world-class region and a destination, you have to have incredible culinary, right? And so big picture was to attract world-class chefs, primarily Spanish, okay, to go to San Sebastian, okay. Many were there already. And San Sebastian was written up not far after as really the gastronomic capital of the world. Supplanted Paris. That was the goal. So now you have another reason to go to that part of the world, right? So it's amazing food, locally grown. You're on the Cantabrian Sea, great seafood, great wine, credible history, right?
Yes.
You know, so it's like that's a lot. So I kind of talk about all of these things because it's all really germane to North Fork authentic. Okay. So as I'm doing this, I had a house. I bought a house probably, 17 years ago in Greenport.
When was the first time you had visited the North Fork?
Oh, okay.
Fishing?
Well, it's kind of funny. Even growing up in the South Fork, right? We were 10. I remember coming to Cutchogue for our summer vacation. And I guess we were somewhere, I don't even remember exactly where. It was a long time ago, but somewhere near Nassau Point-ish, whatever. Was like a sand road with a couple of bungalows on it, right? You open the door and fall in the bay, right? And it was the ideal summer vacation, right? We'd spend a week at this place and basically barbecue, fish, whatever, right? You lived in a bathing suit and a t-shirt. That was it. It's kind of telling in that even then, you know, that was 1968, 1970. Even then, you know, the South Fork had a lot of people in the summer and we wanted to get away. So we came to the North Fork, right? And then as I got older, I had family friends who started to move to the North Fork. I had a really good friend who was a pharmacist in Greenport when I was in high school. I was familiar with Greenport specifically in that my brother, who's 7 years older, was the chef at the Sandbar and then at the American Hotel. And he was also a CIA, Culinary Institute trained chef. Okay. So we would take the ferries across to Greenport to buy fish in Greenport. Okay. And at that time, Krabby Jerry's was a seafood shop. It wasn't a restaurant. I'm trying to remember the place. Not Miller's. I can't think of it. Right where the carousel is.
Mitchell's?
Mitchell's, okay. Mitchell's also had seafood for sale. Right?
Yeah.
You know, so Greenport was very different. Greenport was very much a kind of fishing, shipbuilding community, right?
Yes.
A little rough around the edges. That was the perception, right? But,
yes,
you know, I was intrigued, right? And, you know, I guess I always considered Greenport kind of the fourth of the Holy Trinity, meaning, you know, Sag Harbor, Nantucket, New Bedford, right? In the whaling heyday, you know, those were big places, right? They were very wealthy places. And Greenport was part of that. Didn't really get kind of the same...
like recognition as the other two.
Yeah, but, you know, I think...
Still had its history.
Still had the history, right? So, you know, so I was familiar with the North Fork, but, you know, then kind of didn't really come. You know, as I said before, I'm a big sailor. So, you know, we would sail around Shelter Island and come through Bug Light, coming in past Greenport and just keep going. Because it's like there was no reason to stop.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, Greenport, I love you and I live here. So, you know, and we know that story has changed.
Yes.
Right? But all this kind of, you know, think about this like kind of synthesis, this big funnel that put all these different life experiences doing these things, right? And, you know, here I have a house in Greenport, and I said, gee, wouldn't it be great to live there full time? You know, my daughter was growing up. Basically, she went off to college, and I moved to Greenport full time. And, you know, realized I need to be here full time to do what I really want to do. And that is to kind of build a regional umbrella brand for the North Fork. And, you know, I just kind of observed and saw what was going on out here. This tremendous culture of, you know, food and beverage production, you know, 400 years. You know, even growing up in the South Fork, the North Fork was always kind of like, well, that's where the food's grown. You know, it was always agriculture. I wasn't that familiar with aquaculture, but I was fascinated, you know, and came here and realized, okay, how can I apply my life experience and my expertise and help a region that I love and do what I like to do? And that was really the genesis of the idea for North Fork Authentic, in that there are a lot of kind of sector organizations. You have Long Island Wine Country, Farm Bureau, you have LEOGA, which is the Long Island Oyster Growers Association. You have chambers and bids and different things, right? And, B&B organizations, and they all tend to kind of focus in their silo, right? But nothing really ties them all together. And ultimately, it comes down to the premise of what attracts people and what kind of supplants an idea in someone's mind about a region, okay? And it's the totality of all of the assets they have. And, I looked at the Hudson Valley, which is known for dairy, right? And it's like you say Hudson Valley to people and they go, oh yeah, they got A, B, blah, blah. Great, right? Or Napa, right? And oh my God, great wines, great food, okay? Or Sonoma, right? And those didn't just happen by accident. Those were really created by people promoting those regions, okay? Doing the hard work, really large economic development projects, right? Working within the community with other organizations, with the producers, trying to kind of make that a sustainable region. And some of the challenges that we have here, like many other kind of seasonal tourist destinations, is weather, right? We can't beat Mother Nature, but, we can find ways around that. Really the goal was to kind of create an umbrella brand with a purpose for economic sustainability for the region, right? And kind of look at the gaps, what's missing, how we can help, what's required. I think people out here tend to be very independent-minded because they've had to be. They haven't had this support that maybe they'd like from the state, right? Which was kind of, again, why we launched this brand. And I should back up and say that, we launched in 2017. I spent a year prior lobbying the state. I went to New York Ag and Markets. I went to Long Island Regional Economic Development Corporation and many other kind of related organizations and said, guys, you've done a lot to promote New York State in other areas, right? You put hundreds of millions of dollars in the Hudson Valley, the Finger Lakes, and other things, right? What are you doing for the North Fork? Okay? So the net was, we got a grant to launch the brand. And that was kind of a good primer. And so we thought about, what can we do? What value can we provide immediately to show that we weren't kidding? And to really connect the dots. And, we took 20 North Fork producers from all sectors to the New York Fancy Food Show, which is the largest specialty food show in the world. They take over the entire Javits Center for 1 week. Okay, so just to get a sense of the scale, if you go to the boat show's on one floor. That's it. Okay. This is the entire thing. Okay. Wow. Now, to show kind of what you're up against really from other countries and how they perceive the value of their exports, if you will, right? Italy would take the entire top floor, which, mind you, was a smaller floor. It was half a floor, right? But still. 100,000 square feet, maybe more. I don't know, right? Yeah. It just goes on and on and on. So you would go up there and you would walk through the show, and it was if you were walking through all of Spain, you could go through the south of Spain and have all the food you would experience, the wines, the gelato, the this, the that, the blah, 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 right? And they're really, selling trade shows, right? I mean, this is to the trade only. These are not consumer shows, right? They're there to find buyers for their goods, okay, around the world. And this show attracts about 125,000 global buyers each year. They do it twice a year. They do once in New York in the summer and once either in Vegas or California in the winter. Right? So we said, well, let's go to the big leagues. So we took a double booth space, which is about a 10 by 20 space, so built a booth, kind of presented as a free-form farmer's market, if you will. And we invited producers from different sectors to represent the region. And the idea was, these are all the different things we have available from the North Fork. Okay, so we had great wines, we had great spirits, beer, oysters, duck, you name it, we had it. Agriculture, right, the whole shebang. We had food producers. We launched new brands that we brought there. We brought chefs from the North Fork in each day. And at the end of the day, we would do wine and food pairings. So Chef Noah from Noah's in Greenport came in, okay, and made one of his duck dishes using Crescent Farm duck. And we paired that with a lens wine. Another day, we had Oyster Pond's oysters with Long Island vodka. And so people would come to the booth and they go, oh my God, we had no idea you guys had all of that. Where are you?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, we're 90 miles east of here. Wow. Who knew? Right?
And we're not the Hamptons.
And we're not the Hamptons, right? And we have a history of food production.
Yes.
We are an agricultural region. Let's not forget that. So, ultimately, all of these things go down to balance, right? I think, what do we want as a community? You want balance, right? You want preservation. You need economic sustainability because people need to support themselves, feed their families, okay? And so this was one path to do that, that we have become very reliant on what I'll call agritourism. Just come out, look at my cow, buy my tomato at the farm stand, whatever, which is fine, but that kind of, creates other challenges like traffic. Right? And then when you have things like COVID happen, that becomes a real problem. Again, we're trying to do a lot of different things at a lot of different levels, working with a lot of different organizations to kind of fill the gaps, fill their needs, help do what they maybe don't have the expertise to do, don't have the time to do. There are a lot of amazing nonprofit organizations out here, but, they're made up of volunteers, right? So, we're big proponents on 1 + 1 = 3, right? Let's work together. Let's collaborate. Let's do what we're best at and really keep the eye on the goal. It's not about territory per se. It's about big picture thinking. Get in the trenches and do the hard work.
Yes. Initially starting the business up, how was it reaching out to people in the area and getting them interested?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. Outreach and onboarding are crucial to success. We'll put it that way, okay? Now, I also have to kind of back up for a minute that the original concept for North Fork Authentic was to be a food hub destination, okay? And we were in contract negotiations at the Capital One headquarters in Mattituck, okay, which is a huge space, okay, with huge parking. So we were basically going to have food production. We were going to have anchor restaurants. We were going to have a showroom for food, beverage, flowers, other things, a rooftop deck, food rescue. I mean, a lot of different things, right? And the idea was to make it kind of a large, multifaceted showroom for all the wonderful things that the North Fork has to offer. That fell through. And we said, okay, now what? So we kind of went into the virtual world. We went to the Fancy Food Show. We built a website. The website is vibrant. It changes weekly. We launched a marketplace, okay? We have a marketplace of over 500 businesses and organizations on the North Fork, okay, that we promote weekly. We continue to add to that. To your question of how was it to get everyone involved, some easy, some not so easy, just like people, all different, right?
Yes.
In some cases it was, okay, show me, prove to me. Yes. That was one reason why we went to the Fancy Food Show. We went with a bunch of fence sitters who said, well, I'm not so sure. And after a week, they were like, wow, right?
Mm-hmm.
They made a lot of sales. They had relationships with a lot of new customers that were well beyond the North Fork. So that expanded their horizons. And that was the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
To see there's a bigger world than just here. Don't stop what you're doing here, but maybe in addition, there are other things you can do. If you're producing, I don't know, nut butters, well, there are only so many people in the North Fork you can sell those to, right?
Mm-hmm.
But around the world, there are a lot.
Yes.
So then it's, if you can scale your business and you can build a supply chain and get distribution, you have a pretty thriving business. And how does that benefit the North Fork? Well, it benefits the business, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They're creating jobs for the community. Now, in the case of nut butters, well, they may not be buying the nuts from here, but hopefully they're buying other raw goods from the region, right? So, again, in the bigger, broader sense of economic development, it's all of these different things, right? In some way, shape, and form, how does it benefit the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's produced on the North Fork and sold in other parts of the world is really a form of advertising, right?
Mm.
If you go into a supermarket, if you go to even in the Whole Foods in Brooklyn, if you pick up a product and you look at it and you look at the label and it says Cutchogue or North Fork on it, people go, oh, that's what they have there, right? So those are forms of advertising. And that's what, when I talk about integration, it's all of these different things. It's all very intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Even with just looking at from your time working for other companies
Yes.
or brands, and then looking at the marketing and branding today, some of the differences in how it's might have evolved, and you're able to even do this without having like a brick and mortar.
Yes. Would I love to have a brick and mortar? Absolutely. Okay. And hopefully at some point we will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right now we're kind of virtual. I mean, our brick and mortar is on the web. Okay.
Yes.
And it's a very robust website. And, as I said, I mean, we do a weekly campaign, which is really much bigger than just a communications campaign, called Savor the North Fork. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is what I'll kind of say. It's a multifaceted approach to keep the North Fork top of mind, right? Engage multiple audiences, increase awareness in supply chains, and just communicate what we have to offer year round.
Mm-hmm.
In one simple thing, it's don't forget we're here year round. You can still buy our stuff. You can come visit in February, right?
Yes.
Because if you live in Brooklyn and you talk to someone, they go, oh yeah, we love the North Fork in the summer. And I go, uh-huh. And what about in March? Oh, are they open? Yep, we are. And so that is where communication comes into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a never-ending, evolving effort. It really is. I wear many hats like everyone else out here, right? I mean, I'm the founder and president of North Fork Authentic, but I also have Brent Robertson, which is my kind of brand development and marketing communications firm. So I do work with clients with that. In some cases, they're very separate. Some cases, they're related. It just depends. Really, our goal is to work with other organizations and businesses, okay, to kind of bring the entire region up. It kind of takes off of the JFK phrase, a rising tide floats all boats. And so that's really how we approach these things. And it's not just about food, beverage, hospitality. It's about arts and culture. We work with a lot of cultural organizations. I mean, again, it goes to the whole idea of what makes a great region great. Everything, right? What do we have here? A lot, right? We have a lot of different things. We may not have a lot of them, but we have an incredible diversity. We have shipbuilding in Greenport. You got oyster farms in Orient, Peconic, Southold, Greenport, I mean, there are things all over the place, right? And part of what we do is connect the dots, we were at the Southold Winterfest on Saturday.
Yes.
And I probably spoke to 300-400 people over the course of 5 hours. I mean, it was a whirlwind. It was great, right? And, I'd say, where are you from? Oh, I live in Aquabach. Oh, great. Have you ever been to Orient? No. Oh, do you know them? No. Okay. And, so part of it is it's very fragmented, And, so people are very interested in what other communities are doing. They don't kind of know how to approach it, right? So think of us as kind of the big funnel, right? We're the entry point in. And from North Fork Authentic, you can get to other places. Whether you're looking for experiences, whether you're looking for a place to stay, whether you're looking for a specific food product, whether you're looking for someone to collaborate with, or whether you're looking for local services, right? So we kind of function on multiple levels, right? We work within the community, the North Fork, the East End, all the way up the island, the New York metro region. I mean, we have a pretty large database that we continue to grow, that we do outreach with. We do contests just to kind of see where people are, right? Because one of the requirements is, what's your zip code? And from that, I can see who's responding, what their interests are. We did a Savor Cutjog promotion, okay? We got responses from Santa Monica, from basically almost 48 contiguous states in the United States, which I find fascinating. And it kind of proves my point that there is some connection that these people have to the North Fork, or an interest. Either they have a second home, they grew up here, they have an aunt and uncle that lives here, they've heard of it, what is it? And so those are relationships that you want to nurture. Right? Those are what we call brand ambassadors. They kind of go preach the gospel for the region. And that is what is, marketing is in a bigger level, going beyond the North Fork. We do a lot of different things at a lot of different levels that maybe the resident community is not aware of because it doesn't directly impact them. We do wholesale sales for, certain industries. We really kind of tend to look at where are the challenges, where are the opportunities, what gaps can we fill? After we did the Fancy Food Show, we launched a concierge food distribution service, which was basically a refrigerated van, okay? That we started out, it went from Orient and stopped at multiple farms and different food and beverage producers on the North Fork, went to the South Fork, went to Montauk, okay? And in every direction, we made sure the truck was full. And then we ended up going to Western Suffolk with that. We went up to Maine. We'd go to Maine and buy lobsters, okay? Bring lobsters back and bring them something they didn't have, right? So that's collaboration in the biggest, broadest sense, right? Why did we do that? Because there was a need. Years ago, there was a company that did that, and they grew too big and decided they couldn't do it anymore. So the need is still there. Now you need to find a solution. And we look at it as like, well, if not us, who? It really is about finding solutions to a lot of different problems. And it all goes down to, supply chain for producers, okay? Products on shelves, again, are advertising for the region. We are a region of high quality, small batch producers, right? Virtually everything that's produced out here is great quality. May not be inexpensive in some cases, okay, but that's a function of scale. But, we're high quality, right? So if somebody wants high quality, this is the place to get it. And part of that is just communicating to people that, A, we exist, we're here, we're doing it, it's available, and you're welcome to come see it. That's the tourism aspect. Without agriculture, we wouldn't be as an appealing a region, right? I mean, people want to come to a winery. They want to see water. They want to see all these things, right? So, again, it's that intertwined thing,
Yes. Have you seen an increase in, well, obviously you've been taking in more companies or brands in
Yes.
terms of helping advertising, but just getting more people to recognize the region. Have you seen an
Yes.
increase in that and people coming out here?
Yes. All the above, right?
Yeah.
It's a slow, steady kind of a thing. And it really is like a revolving door, because we have a good chunk of second homeowners that have now made this their primary home. And I think COVID was, made that happen, right?
Yes.
So that's okay, right? That's great. So, we've got more people. People are constantly moving around the world, right? People are dying, people are being born. It's kind of it's a never-ending revolving door, that you can't become complacent. You have to constantly create awareness and market things. I mean, my past experience with Rioja is the prime example, right? Rioja was at kind of the upper tier at a certain point, and they became complacent, and they lost market share. And people perceive them as their father's wine. And so the younger generations wanted nothing to do with it, right? So this is where, how do you make a brand relevant? Well, marketing, right? It takes effort, it takes time, right? And we kind of, did that, put them in a whole different sphere. They were big sponsors of the New York Fashion Week. That got them involved in a whole different area, right? So, each thing is unique. You kind of do what's appropriate. I think it really comes down to big strategic ideas that are compelling, right? That tend to trickle down and tend to trickle across all sectors and down to people. I'm constantly out meeting people, business people, residents, civic organizations, you name it, right? And people will say, oh, yeah, we heard of you guys. Oh, yeah, right. And, well, it requires that. It requires a lot of hard work. I mean, we have really grown this organically, with the help of everyone else. And the reality is we're doing it for the benefit of everyone else, right? We're trying to make this a sustainable region. I mean, you want to attract new talent. You want to retain the young talent that you have here, right? We want this place to be a place that people want to stay and live, right? And they can earn a living. They can support their families. And that provides opportunity. We're not just a tourist destination,
No.
because then, well, gee, what about the other 6 months of the year when the tourists don't come? So again, it's all balance, and retain the beauty of what makes this such a wonderful place.
Yes. Definitely. I guess this is more of a general, like, not specifically North Fork authentic, but just looking back at your career, is there a particular project or moment that you're most proud of with your work?
Yes. City Harvest. Okay.
City Harvest.
City Harvest is basically food rescue in New York City. Okay. I launched a company called One World Design when I left the advertising world and went back to the design world. Okay. And opened One World Design, which then became One World Communications, and then just One World Market Advertising. It's like whatever. But anyway, at that time, there was there still is, a thriving nonprofit organization called City Harvest. Okay. They were a few years in, and they really needed help to they needed strategic planning to figure out where they were, where they should go, and how they should get there. Okay. And that's really one of the things that I think, I have a lot of experience with. We offer to clients through Brent Robertson, but also through North Fork Authentic. So, we really did kind of a deep dive into who they are, what they do, why they matter. And one of their needs, and my personal feeling was I kind of wished they didn't have to exist as an organization, but that's not possible. But one of the things we realized, and their brilliance, was that they took food that was basically wasted, right, that would get thrown out. Okay. Perfectly good food, whether it's day-old bread, leftovers from a kitchen, a high-end restaurant, you name it, right? And they would bring them to food pantries and other organizations that could use the food. Raw goods, vegetables, fruits, you name it. Schools, right? Areas that don't get these types of food, right? They just don't. Great stuff. I mean, coming from some of the best restaurants in the world. What their challenge was who are they? How do you clearly communicate what they do? And how do we help them do it? And what their need was, they needed refrigerated trucks with drivers and gas to be able to pick up food from point A and bring it to point B. And as simple as that seems to be, it's an expensive proposition. At that time, a truck, a driver, and a year's worth of gas was about $100,000. They wanted 10 trucks. $1 million was out of the realm. I have to realize at that time, Danny Meyer, Union Square Hospitality, and now Shake Shack, was on the board. We had a lot of really top-tier hospitality people involved in this. So we helped kind of craft, if you will, their communications plan and the vision and where they should go. And at the time, we had a client who money was not their issue. Recognition and street cred and awareness was what they needed. And their name was Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald, we went to them and we said, you guys sponsor a truck. You'll get a mini billboard on a truck, and they'll get the truck. A win-win. What I call a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. So they sponsored 10 trucks. So you had trucks driving all throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City, with their name on it. Name recognition, the good that they do, and the whole thing. Why did they want to do this? Well, they needed to recruit new talent. You had financial services companies like, Deutsche Bank, the list goes on and on, the big boys, spending millions of dollars on advertising, They would get all the top tier talent from the B schools. No one had heard of Cantor. This is one reason you advertise, just awareness, right? So it was really a different form of advertising, but it was advertising with a purpose, really dual purposes, right? Everyone got what they needed. And I think that was a very, very successful campaign. And within that, we did a very simple kind of a subset, which was, how do you support a school lunch program? So we did a direct mailing piece that was a brown paper bag. It just had the crayon writing on it, $20 feeds a kid for a week. That's what you got. So when you went to open your mailbox, there it was. Sent a very clear message. What they were about, what they were looking to do. I've done a lot of kind of fun things that I'm very proud of. But I think those probably fall into the category of do well by doing good.
Yes.
And I think that that's really a large driver to what we're trying to do with North Fork Authentic, right? That I believe it's okay to do well by doing good, and it's really about public-private partnership. It's really about teamwork. It's about bringing skill sets to the party that other people may not have. And they have others that you don't have, right? And you put those together, and that's when it becomes potent. Because it's really about ideas, right? And then, great ideas don't matter if they're not well executed, right? So then you need boots on the ground, and so we're involved in all of those different things, because if you can't make it real, it didn't happen. It's kind of like the old joke, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody heard it, right?
Yes. And then how would people reach out to you, or the best way in terms of if they want to get involved or be a part of that?
Yeah, we welcome collaboration from everyone. NorthForkAuthentic.com is the place to find us. The website, there are a lot of opportunities to connect with me personally. Brent at NorthForkAuthentic.com. The bottom of our homepage is hello@NorthForkAuthentic.com. We're responsive. I respond to those emails, or somebody does. I have to say, one of my kind of pet peeves, if you will, is that people will say, oh yeah, we need some help or whatever. And then I have a hard time finding them. And it's like, well, if we can't find you, that's a problem, right? So, you have to kind of be found, right? Mm-hmm. And so, one of our core tenets is we're there. We're always there. We respond. We want to collaborate. We want to hear from people. I mean, though the North Fork is not that big, okay, it's constantly changing. There are new things happening all the time, new businesses opening, people leaving, people evolving, right? Hybrid businesses, from gentleman farmers to hobbies to whatever, that's okay, right? But if you want to be found, you have to kind of provide an opportunity to make that happen. Right?
Yeah.
And I think the web is a great place for that. But yes, we welcome collaboration. One of the interesting things, years ago, there used to be a company, I can't even remember what it was, but they would hold up a card with their phone number and they'd say, call us because we can't call you, right?
Yes.
And that's really the truth. It's like, if they had your phone number, they'd call you, right? But, they don't. So you got to call them. Right? In our case, I think, email's the best way to find us. We do have a phone number, but go to the website. You'll find an exhaustive amount of information in there. We're constantly adding it. We are in the middle of updating the website. We're offering a bunch of new services and different things. Here we go. North Fork Authentic is now on Instagram. Okay, so we're busy all over.
Nice.
We're like the little engine that could. One big thing that we're in the middle of doing, and hopefully we'll officially announce soon, is what we're calling Savor the North Fork, which is a showcase event. It's really a trade, media, and consumer showcase event that brings the entire North Fork community together. So it's food, beverage, hospitality, arts, culture, and history. Okay,
wonderful. Which is
what I was mentioning to you about with the Sterling Historical Society, right?
Yes.
And East End Seaport Museum, and the Southold Historical Society or Museum, and Oyster Ponds and other things, right? That we have this tremendous history out here, that's in bits and pieces, right? We want to kind of pull a lot of it together and make it a really wonderful experience, a weekend experience beginning of May in Greenport, right? And so part of it, the Friday night and Saturday morning, will be trade and media only. Right? Trade are like, retailers, wholesalers, co-packers, different things, right? The media, New York Times, whomever, right? Big and broad, right? Here it is, right? Because we have to kind of generate buzz about the region, right? And this is one good way to do it. And to kind of put it all in context in a snapshot for people where they can walk into a place and go, wow, you mean those oysters come from that place by that person who does? Yeah. So it goes back to the whole origin idea, right? And legacy. And then open it up to consumers because, again, nowadays the lines are so blurred. What is a consumer versus a trade person? Well, it's people. And how do they respond to things? Maybe they're just not working that day, but they're still a person, right? And or their brother is in the media business or whatever, right? You just never know. And my experience has been that throw a big wide net and you just never know what you'll catch.
Yes.
Be open to opportunity, but a large part of it is you just have to be out there to make that happen.
Definitely.
And that's an event that we definitely want to collaborate with everyone on.
Yeah, like you said, kind of bringing, like you mentioned with the historical societies and other, it's
right.
Sometimes they can be isolated and they need to be brought together and collaborate to stronger community.
And they have kind of different assets and portfolios that are really amazing, right? But the Sterling Historical Society has wonderful photographs, of the glory days of oysters, and let's get that back here, right? And other things, right? And, so where do you see that? Well, you can go to the hospital and walk through the halls and see some of it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the museum when it's open, but it's limited because it's a small place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you help open that up? And the Seaport Museum has other things, and they're all complementary. And, again, it's that whole intertwined thing, right? It's about the region,
Mm-hmm.
And it's about making a strong impression on people. It's like, wow, we had no idea that you guys did all that. And it's also next generation. If you're talking to somebody who's 20, it's like, well, how would they know? Unless they've been told. So it's really, we say we empower the community to thrive through connection, number one, right? Collaboration, innovation. Now, innovation doesn't have to be creating a new app that does it could just be a different way to do things, right? Innovation is relative to where you are now. We do very innovative things and things that are just a little outside of the box, but that's okay, right? Education and promotion. And again, they're all intertwined, right? Education's good. People want to learn. They want to know. Make it interesting for them, right? Put context around it, So really everything we try to do in some way, shape, or form has bits and pieces of all those elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did something a while back on shipbuilding in Greenport, and I got a ton of emails from people in Mattatuck and Aquabog going, oh, we didn't know they did that there. So great, well, come to Greenport, check it out. Right? And vice versa, because it's as much internal communication as it is external. It is a constantly evolving, shifting situation. People move here from other places, why? Oh, we just love it. We came on vacation. We had to be, okay, great, You never know. You are in the constant education business. That's what I would always tell my clients, particularly with Spain. I say, you are in the education business. You are educating people about your country, your culture, what you do, what you have to offer. Yes, they can buy some of that in a bottle or in a jar or whatever, but ultimately what gets them to love Spain is all of the other things. And if they go to that country and they have a great experience and they come back, great. You've got a customer for life. And that's ultimately our goal, right? We want people to come here, think about us, read about us in a positive way and go, wow, what a great, vibrant community. We want to be part of that. We want to help support them. You know?
But I think I had one other question more about just the North Fork in the future. It could be more separate from the North Fork Authentic and just your personal thoughts on what you might hope for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line. Would you like to see?
Balance. I think, I'm involved in a lot of community organizations. I'm on the Southhold Economic Development Committee, which I have been on for about 5 years. I'm on the North Fork Promotional Council. Okay, so I'm very involved in a lot of different things, look at different aspects of things. And, I hear a lot of, we don't want to change that. We don't want that. Yes, we want that, right? And I think it really all comes down to balance. It all comes down to preserving the character of what we have, preserving quality of life, improving quality of life. It's how do you kind of help a region prosper and thrive? Where do I see it going? I think we're in a tremendously unique situation here. In a beautiful environment that's got so much to offer, proximity to some of the largest markets in the world, New England, New York Metro. We're a gem. Right? We're an undiscovered gem to some. We're an over-discovered gem to others. Some people, keep them away. We don't want that, right? And again, I think it really all comes down to balance. It's preserving what our heritage is, what our culture is, attracting new talent, retaining talent, attracting the right investment, not becoming an overnight, just a tourism community, right? We're so much more than that, because what drives tourism? All of those natural assets. Where do I see it going? Gee, I wish I had a crystal ball to predict that. My personal goal is to just continue to help grow a thriving, vibrant community, that plays well together.
Yes, definitely.
That collaborates, it's for the benefit of all. Right?
Yes.
I live here too. I want it to be a great place. It is a great place. I want it to continue to be a great place, for all the right reasons, to provide opportunity. We have a tremendous brain trust out here. There's a lot of talent. It's just very fragmented. And it's how do you kind of, again, connect the dots? And how do you put everyone to work, at least going in the same direction, which is not an easy task.
No.
People are busy with their lives. They're busy running businesses. They have kids, they have whatever, right? So, but again, I do wholeheartedly believe in the idea of a rising tide floats all boats, right?
Yes. No, I think that's important moving forward.
Yeah. Embrace what you have,
Yes.
And be clear-eyed about it, and be innovative, right? What can we do going forward that's kind of low impact to the environment, that will help sustain the region? It's not that you walk away from what you have, but can you evolve from that? Are there more opportunities? And I believe there are. Because again, it goes to that work-life balance. It's a great place to live. So how do you make it able to support yourself?
Yes. Yeah, that's something that can be a challenge, but we have to keep working on trying to make sure, like you said, with having people out here year round and they can live out here. And
yeah, nowadays you can live anywhere and work for anyone.
yeah.
I'm a perfect example of that. I work with clients around the world 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right?
Yes.
It didn't matter, right? The benefit to that was that I could do work at night and send them an email and they'd get it in the morning, right? And there was no time lag, So,
yes.
there are kind of pluses and minuses to everything, right? But nowadays it's like we live in a gig economy. Everybody's kind of remote in some way, shape, or form. And so let's use that to our advantage. Let's not be constrained by, what can constrain us. Let's kind of, work around that if possible. You can't do that with everything. You can only grow so many grapes on so much land. That's just a reality, right? But, but are there ways to maximize efficiencies, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And again, that goes to the whole marketing thing, right? Efficiency and effectiveness. Work smarter, not harder.
Definitely.
So that's,
No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story and talking about North Fork Authentic and really helping to bring the community together and businesses thrive out here and put the North Fork on the map more. So
yeah, the funny thing is we are on the map, but you have to constantly remain on the map, right?
Yes.
And look, it's not that, it's not, we want to over commercialize it. In no way, shape, or form do we want that. Again, we live here too, right?
Yes.
I think it comes down to balance, right? But there's a little bit of walk a mile in someone else's shoes, right? That some folks have a really hard time surviving out here. And others are doing really well, okay? And you just kind of need to be aware of that and the balance, right? And, I think everyone should enjoy a good quality of life. And that's the ultimate goal, right? Retain the great things that we have and expand on other opportunities that are low impact, And it just, in some cases, it just requires different thinking or being open to opportunities. And we're involved in a lot of different things, not just out here, but with other organizations, regionally, statewide, other things nationally, right? And so part of it is, it all kind of, again, it's that word of intertwined again, but it all kind of matters, right? Because people will say, oh, wow, we had no idea. Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah. And if you don't tell the story, they don't know it. Don't assume that they just know, because they don't. And when I lived in Brooklyn, I would say to somebody, oh, yeah, I'm in Greenport. And they go, Greenpoint?
Yes.
All right.
I get that too.
Yeah. And I say, no, Greenport. It's 90 miles. Oh, what? Really? Wow, that's cool. Great. Okay. And so that is education. That is what I mean by education, right? It's awareness and just letting them know. That's one part of it. And then the next sentence is, and you guys should go check it out. Oh, okay. And hopefully they do, and they tell their friends what a great experience it has, and exponentially the idea grows, okay? And then at a certain point, they've moved on, and the next group comes through. It's a never-ending process. Think of it as it's infinite. It's a bottomless bucket that you have to constantly fill. And it requires time and effort and thought.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that's that.
No, but thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
Thank you, Christopher. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to my rants.
It was fun.
I get very passionate about it. So,
yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Be well. We'll see you around the hoods, as they say.
Yes.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 123 with Brent Robertson. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library Podcast, and we'll see you next time.